Good morning and welcome to Education Elements June webinar, Navigating the First Year as a Superintendent, a conversation with experienced superintendents. My name is Dr. Layla Newland, and I am the Senior Vice President for the Professional Education Services Division here at Education Elements. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my esteemed panelists, whom I'll introduce in a moment. As folks get settled in the room, I do want to pause and ask our attendees to share their name, the role and district in which they currently serve, and a check-in here at EE. We always like to kick off our meetings and sessions with a check-in question to warm everybody up. What leadership skill do you value most? And panelists, I'm going to ask you to do the same in the chat. So we'll take 1 minute as folks get settled in the room. And I'm asking folks to share their name, role, district, and a leadership skill that they value most. Okay, before we dive into today's session, I did want to just note a few housekeeping items. I'm going to provide an overview of our why and why we're coming together today to have this important discussion, and a little bit of background research that we've done here at Education Elements, and highlight some case studies from work that we've done across the field. But I want to spend a majority of the time with our panelists because I know our attendees are really here to hear their insights and experiences. So because of that, I am going to ask our attendees to pose questions in the chat throughout our discussion. I'll be monitoring the chat as a facilitator for this panel to ensure that we get to the questions that you came to this session hoping to have answered. As a little bit of background on Education Elements, we have 13 years of experience working in schools and districts, and we are a firm believer that when our schools grow, our people grow, and that's a theme that's going to surface in today's discussion. So before we dive into the discussion, I do want to take a moment to both thank our panelists for donating their time, but also to thank ALAS for their partnership with Education Elements and helping to promote and support this event this morning. So thanks to ALAS, thanks to our panelists. And now it's time to introduce those that we have with us. So I'll start with Michael Cardona, Superintendent of San Marcos CISD in Texas.
All right, good morning, everybody. Dr. Michael Cardona, Superintendent here. San Marcos is about 30 miles south, directly south of Austin, Texas, in Central Texas. We're a district of about 8,400 students, 80% of whom are economically disadvantaged, 70% Latino. We sit where Texas State University is. If you know Texas, Texas State University is the largest teachers college, but we just have recently begun great partnerships with them. I've been here 9 years. This is my one and only superintendent job, and I'm excited to be on this panel.
Thank you, Michael. Can I introduce Serena Shivers, from former superintendent, right, of Redford Union Schools, but most recently Deputy Executive Director over at the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. Serena?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm always honored and feel like it is really a heartwarming experience to get a chance to talk to people that are just stepping into the field or who are in their very first 3 years in the field. As Layla said, I am a former superintendent. I actually don't even consider myself to be a former superintendent because I'm just pausing before I step back into the seat to do something that I just couldn't say no to. But for the last, going now into my 4th year, I work on behalf of all of the superintendents across the state of Michigan. So I get a chance to get to know districts across the state, north, south, east, and west, work with superintendents of all different sizes, districts, different backgrounds, different demographics. But most importantly, work shoulder to shoulder with leaders that are doing the tough work every day, and get to know on a very intimate level what that work looks like in districts across Michigan and across the region. I will also say that probably one of the things that I do that I enjoy the most is work with brand new superintendents. So superintendents in the state that are brand new within their first 3 years work with me through a new superintendent's leadership academy, as well as I run an aspiring superintendent's academy, both here in Michigan, but also at the national level. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Serena. We also have Joe Hochreiter, Superintendent of the City School District of Albany in New York. Joe?
Yes, hi everyone, good morning. I'm Joe Hochreiter. I've served as superintendent here in Albany for 54 weeks, so just a little over a year. We're a district of 10,000 students. We're located about 2 hours north of New York City. It's the state capital of New York. We have 17 schools, including an international school where more than 20 languages are spoken, and these are students that are really new to our country, that are part of federal resettlement processes. And so we're very lucky to have a school and a staff dedicated to supporting those students and their families as they move here. 70% of our students are non-white, 68% of our students are in poverty or qualify for free and reduced lunch. And this is my 14th year as superintendent. I served as superintendent for 10 years previously in a district outside of New York City, and then also in a rural part of New York State. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Joe. And last but not least, we have Gustavo Balderas, AASA President-elect and Superintendent of Beaverton School District, Oregon. Gustavo, I'm so excited that you were able to donate your time this morning.
I appreciate being invited, Lila, and appreciate the panelists being on. I'm Gustavo Balderas, currently president of ALAS as well. So thank you, ALAS, for helping sponsor this as well. And president-elect of AASA. I'm currently superintendent in Beaverton School District, about 40,000 kids, diverse system, 110 languages. 60% of our kids are kids from diverse backgrounds. And it's just a swath of languages and a swath of culture. We are at Nike headquarters. And also Intel bedroom community. So it's a really diverse, rich environment. And like I always say, diversity is our superpower. I've been a superintendent a few times in California, Washington State, and Oregon, and 14 years in the seat as a superintendent and 34 years overall. And just appreciate this discussion because, again, the high turnover of superintendents across the U.S. is really impactful. In Oregon, 191 districts, 165 new superintendents the last 4 years. So thank you for this discussion.
Thank you. All right, well, that's a good segue into our why. So we understand that we have a leadership pipeline challenge, right? Both at the superintendency, but throughout our school systems, which is something that I hope we can dive into today. And when we think about why we're in the current state that we're in, I think a few things stand out to me. One, the myriad of challenges that you all, whether you're currently in the superintendency or about to enter into the superintendency, there are persistent challenges that follow the pandemic. We're talking less and less about it, but what we are talking about is chronic absenteeism, student behavior, the political climate in our local communities, as well as teachers leaving the profession with a dwindling teacher pipeline. So it's a daunting task for leaders to navigate all of these challenges, which makes the job even more challenging than it was perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. Because we see the turnover at the superintendent level, as well as the school building level, we also see this challenge of initiative fatigue, right? So as new leaders, we may come in with a new initiative or we inherit initiatives from our predecessors. And so what we see is another layer of complexity to coming in to guide a group as you establish your own vision and priorities for the organization to serve our students. We also know that academics continue to be top of mind for you all. As we look at NAEP scores and the decline there against the backdrop of a decline in funding, you all are at this critical moment in time where you have to be even more deliberate with your spending. And then finally, needing to build trust, right? Related to that local political context, as well as leadership turnover. So our staff, when you come into an organization where there have been multiple leaders, Joe, I know this is something that you'll probably speak to later, right? But when you come into an environment where the employee base feels like, okay, here's another new leader. What is he or she going to say? And how long are they going to stay? That trust building becomes so critical so that they know you're invested in their success and student success. I want to highlight some work that the founder of Education Elements started and that we continue to focus on here at EE, and that's our new school rules. In this book, we've established 6 new school rules that we're seeing both new leaders and leaders who have been in seat for quite some time leverage to help build trust across their leadership team. So the advice that I would have, and that is grounded in our new school rules, planning for change, not perfection. That can be, I know that personally as an organizational leader can be a downfall for me. We want to get it right every time, right? But preparing our leadership bench for change, understanding we're going to make mistakes, we're going to fail, right? How do we fail fast? Spending time with that teaming, so building that trust. And as I mentioned, given the current environment that you all are working in, and some of you are entering into, making sure that you're creating that space to build trust and allow authority to spread is really critical for the success of any of the initiatives and goals that you establish. Making sure that you're managing the rules, so defining the work before you define the people. Aiming for safe enough to try over consensus, right? I think we often aspire to have everybody buy into our vision and get excited and circle around where we want to go. But as many of you know, our seasoned leaders, that's just not our reality, right? And so for our new leaders stepping into the seat, I would highlight that you have to get comfortable with that safe enough to try over consensus. You're always going to have naysayers. And I would argue it's helpful to have those naysayers in your system to help you make sure that you are aware of any blind spots you may have as you're trying to drive change. Make sure that you're sharing information. So I love this, harness the flow and let information go. I'm really excited because I think our panelists are going to provide insight and lessons learned over their years as they've thought about what is the right communication cascade, how to communicate, what have been perhaps failures across their careers where maybe in hindsight they would have communicated in a different way. And then finally, learning the organization. So this whole idea that I mentioned at the start of this session, schools grow when people grow, right? And so we know we're all here to serve our students, but we do need to make sure that we're spending some time at the front end of our entry really investing in our people. And the way that I'm thinking about this right now in my work and what I see with all of the leaders that we're working with is this real need to make sure that our building leaders are engaged in the changes that we're trying to drive and have a clear understanding of why. Because they've seen new leaders in central office, right? They themselves are probably new leaders because we also know what's happening at the principal level. And they really can either carry the torch and drive the change for us, or they can be barriers, right? And it's not that there's malintent there. It's just making sure that we're spending time on that leadership group, because as we think about NAEP scores, as we think about chronic absenteeism, we really need that building leadership bench to be high quality instructional leaders, because that's when we see the reduction in chronic absenteeism. And that's when we see the increase in student achievement scores. So with that, I want to dive into our panel discussion. I want to remind our audience, Please pose your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as our panelists kick us off. I've prepared some questions that I've heard from the field that folks are interested for them to provide insights on, but we're really here to serve you and help you as you step into your next level of leadership this summer. So with that, I want to kick us off, and I'm wondering, Gustavo, if you don't mind starting, and then other panelists will follow. What are the top 2 lessons you learned in your early years of the superintendency? And what are your words of wisdom for our audience today?
I think as a new superintendent, that was a long time ago in Madera Unified in California. And just taking time to really understand the landscape, the political landscape around where you're at. I came from the Portland area to the Central Valley, which is very different in terms of the politics, and just understanding the local dynamics. So take time before you make and get a good understanding, a good grounding of the area that you are around and the local politics, but also making sure that people understand how decisions are made. When I've gone to systems, is a lot of times the system doesn't understand how decisions are made. So make sure that the system is grounded in the decision-making process, and knowing full well that you get your direction from your board, your high-level vision, but everything else is involved you, because again, the board only has one employee, and that's you as a superintendent. So make sure that everybody else around you, from the line staff all the way up the chain to your executive staff, understand how decisions are made. And I think that's when things happen that go awry, is when decisions are made at a lower level that catch you by surprise. And that's another thing, is make sure there's no surprises anywhere in the system. Make sure that's strong communication. So again, lessons, just take time to process, know the politics, but also making sure that people understand how decisions are made. And at the end of the day, you as a superintendent are fully accountable for all those decisions. Can't hear you, Lila. Sorry.
Sorry. Joe, Michael?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I was 29 years old when I became superintendent, and it was a situation where I was deputy superintendent, and the board just asked me if I wanted the job. And so I didn't apply, and I really didn't interview. I guess my previous 3 years were the interview. So at a young age, I learned 2 things. One, these are lifestyle jobs, which means you go to bed looking at your phone and you wake up looking at your phone, or being briefed on things that are happening, whether it's transportation issues, facilities issues, political issues. I'm sure all of the superintendents on this panel will agree. We have relationships with our elected officials, with the fire chief, the police chief. So we're being briefed on things a lot, and there are very few phone calls you can't take. And so my first lesson is that these are lifestyle jobs, and you've got to be able to accept that and negotiate that in your personal life. And the second thing I would say is pace yourself. I learned at an early age that emails at 10 o'clock at night or 4 in the morning don't get you answers any quicker, and it just creates more stress and pressure on your team that you really, really rely on. And within that sort of pace yourself, in all 3 superintendencies I've had, I made the decision to live in the community that I served. That brought a lot of goodwill, but it also created opportunities to pace yourself. If I wanted to go home for lunch real quick and feed the dog, I could do that, and I could zip to see some schools on my way home, on my way back. And so it really all comes back to understanding that this job will eat you up if you don't have some balance in your life, but also if you really just don't understand the respect. That it's going to take up a lot of your time, and the quicker you can negotiate that and make some adjustments, I think the more fulfilling, full life you'll have, whether it's personally or professionally.
Yeah, I think for me, so I came out of Houston ISD, which was the largest school system. So I think if you're looking at superintendencies, you need to understand your skill set first, right? So I had a superintendent who allowed me to act like a superintendent, just keep them informed. I got to interact with board members, so I got to learn the stories of board members, and that's really important because you're going into any kind of job, you are unless you're a deputy that just got promoted from within, for the most part, you are a visitor coming into the community, and make no mistake about it. You might have been born there and been gone a long time, but you come back, you're still a visitor. And those board members' lived experiences guide their policy making. And how it sounds like for those who want to be a superintendent is watch board meetings, and you'll hear board members reference when I was in school, when I had a family member, when I had this, right? And so you have to understand as a superintendent, their stories guide their policy making. And if you come into a community and you don't build relationships with everybody that's just been mentioned, and you start not listening to their stories, you potentially could put yourself in a situation where you're going against the board. So really understanding their stories, how it guides their policy making, and even with your own people, your own team, right? Hire people who are not going to be afraid to tell you the opposite. That the biggest mistake superintendents make is they hire people that are, I guess, yes people. And so I always sought to hire people from not just education, but outside to give me different perspectives coming in. And then really the only thing we've mentioned politics, but I would say as a first year superintendent, stay out of the board member politics. You deal with the board president. And that's how you communicate. But board members will get you into their politics. And I put integrity down, and that will come out very quickly if you are listening to stories or grievances or complaints about the system and then talking to other people, because they all talk to each other. And just finally always understand that you're in the political world. If the first time a board member says, "Hey, I want to talk off the record," or "Can I meet with you for breakfast?" everything's on the record. And any conversation you have, I tell the principals here, you always pretend you're in a level 3 grievance standing before that board. And if you wouldn't say it in front of them, then don't say it anywhere else, because that integrity or lack thereof will come out pretty quickly, especially in smaller and mid. You might get away with it for a while in a large urban system, but in those mid-sized to small districts, word travels very quickly.
Karina, I see you nodding your head. I'm curious, given your personal experience as a superintendent, but also in your work currently with coaching and mentoring new superintendents, what would you layer on to this at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was just thinking ditto to everything they said. So my first layer would be that communication is currency. And, I can't say enough that good communication skills are extremely important for someone that is in the superintendent seat. But the first communication skill that you need to exercise is listening. And I know people say it all the time, but I think once that ball gets rolling and people get in that seat, oftentimes they start moving and regret really not listening. And I don't mean listening to just like hear, but listening to deeply understand, and to also make intersections and to make connections with the things that you're hearing. It truly is a skill. It's something that I'm sure that can be taught, but if you're stepping into that role and you don't have it, you need to really work on communication in that first year. The second one, which is very close to that, is relationships. And that first relationship is with the board. I totally and completely agree with everything that my colleagues have said. And I don't care what size district you're in, you really need to know why the board members are board members, because those are the way in which their voting will creep up based on what they believe, based on why they're in that seat, based on where they took that role, based on why they ran for that seat or were appointed to that seat. So building relationships with your board members is extremely important, and tying that to communication, making sure that you're effectively communicating with the board in the way in which you all collectively agree for that communication to be. And know that I stress the word collectively, because I really do think, I don't know which one of my colleagues said it, about burning the candles at both ends. If you don't put some guardrails up and have some boundaries as a new superintendent, they will text you or email you or call you all hours of the day and the night, and you realize that you have no way to do self-care. So communication within reason, building meaningful relationships would be the layer that I would add on.
Thank you, Serena. So before we get into some of the questions that are focused on that leadership development and vision setting, we do have a question from the audience that I want to share with the group. So on the flip side of lessons learned, what do you find as the most challenging aspects of the superintendency at this moment in time? I'll let you pause on that for a moment.
You know, Lila, the superintendency's changed over my tenure as a superintendent. So it's always been, education's always been political to some extent, but I've never seen it so partisan the last few years, and that's taken a toll on superintendents because we get caught in the crosshairs of the politics. It used to be just read and learn, read and write and math, and it's different now, and I think that's part of the stress, I think, level that and the rationale for so many people leaving the seat is that the politics are getting in the crosshairs of education.
I would just add that unfortunately, each week, myself or my director are having to help superintendents find something else for them to do or negotiate out of a contract. And the single most challenging aspect has been board relationships. And then the second one right next to board relationships is the job isn't what people had hoped it would be, because they are overwhelmed by the things that Gustavo just mentioned. And they really came into the profession to impact the lives of children or the community that they live in. And they find that they're not having any time to do that. And it is eating at the core of who they are. And so they are thinking that maybe they did not make the right decision and they are choosing to leave the profession because of it. Those are the top two reasons that I'm finding.
Michael, I saw you take yourself off mute, so I want to make sure.
Yeah, politics, I think, is a great one, but I think post-COVID, it's adult behavior is really challenging. It doesn't matter who the adult is, but post-COVID, I think, has created unique challenges for all of us because the lack of work ethic, it doesn't matter at what level, seems to be something that's draining. And going along with Gustavo's politics, there's always the board politics and the political nature, but I think it's the inability for adults in the educational system to really grasp that we are like in a market-based war now, and the kid has been monetized, and adults putting their behaviors at the forefront of what's best for kids is at the end of the day going to hurt their own profession, and they just won't get out of their own way. And that irrationality is frustrating, I think, to superintendents, because I think if teachers would get out of their own way, administrators, board members, whatever, and just do what's right by the kid, I think everything else will take care of itself, all the academic outcomes and stuff. But these political wars kind of pit political interests that aren't serving the kid. And it's a never-ending cycle.
And I would say to all of the ends of what we've heard, building a pipeline, because while the politics are real and the panelists have all agreed to stick it out and continue with this work to fight City Hall proverbially, we need really good leaders to work on our team and that we can deputize to stay focused on the work. The politics are happening. That is the era we're in. As Gustavo said, this job is different for me today than when I started 14, 15 years ago. And we've accepted that. We've evolved a little bit, whether we like it or not, we're all still here. But the pipeline is what concerns me, is who are the next generation of leaders that want to do this work, and how much time can we as superintendents commit to building that pipeline, and making sure that our top leaders in our organization today are not only good at their job that they're doing today, but that we're building them for a job they don't know they have the capacity for. So I'm a little more focused on the pipeline to make sure we're surrounded by people smarter than us, so we can go deal with some of the nonsense while the organization continues to move forward.
Joe, so I'm going to have you start with a response to one of the questions that just came in from the audience. So panelists, we've got an engaged audience. There are questions that are coming through the chat, and I want to honor what folks are here to learn about. So related to your point, Joe, how do you lean on the expertise of members of your cabinet, so curriculum, business manager, director, while making sure you're kept in the loop, right? So Gustavo had talked about don't have surprises, know the system. And so it sounds like this attendee is wondering, how do you strike that balance of giving them autonomy, leveraging their expertise, but also making sure that you don't get surprised? So Joe, since you were talking about building that pipeline and surrounding yourself with leaders, can I put you on the spot?
Sure. And I've inherited an organization that I'm the 7th superintendent in 17 years. And so while there has been a lot of turnover in the superintendency, in my previous position, I was superintendent for 10 years. So stability matters to me. So I've spent a lot of time with our cabinet and our executive team, asking a lot of questions about what we should start doing, what we should stop doing, what we should keep doing, and trying to build a coalition around the work and the initiatives. A lot of folks in my first 6 months asked me, what's your new initiative? What are you going to do? And that to me is code for high turnover in an era where they're basically saying, what are you going to do to us? We'll be good soldiers. Meanwhile, I've inherited an environment where when I ask about what we should start doing, stop doing, and keep doing, and I actually have the results here. What we should stop doing are new initiatives. We should stop ineffective programs, and we should stop isolated decisions. And so I've used my first year as sort of a truth-telling opportunity, because you get to ask a lot of questions because you don't own it yet. And so I've turned that data around to our executive team to say, here's where we are. And even our own executive team members, our cabinet members, are asking us to slow down or focus or what have you. So that level of transparency within our own team around taking our own temperature, I think has paid some great dividends, because we're going to spend this summer in my second year going through some planned abandonment and really looking at return on investment to try to slow down the organization so we can move quicker in other areas. So I have to lean on that team to make sure that they're asking the same questions that I am, that they have the same data, and that we're not so focused on solving one school's problem with the universal solution. We have 12 elementary schools. We have a number of examples where if one school has a cough, we give the same medicine to all 12 elementary schools without any consideration for their DNA, climate, culture, what have you. So I'm trying to use our team to slow down in order to go fast. And one way to do that, especially in your first year, is to ask a bunch of questions and create a vulnerable situation or a vulnerable environment where people will be honest with you. The drawback is then you got to do something with that information, because you can't just keep asking questions without action. And so this second year is going to be very action oriented.
Gustavo, Michael, do you have anything you would add to that?
I agree with everything that was said. I think when I was a superintendent in Washington State, the lifespan for a superintendent was 2.9 years. So going to what we just said is there's also a sense of urgency because you may not be there long. So it's that push-pull the superintendents get in. There's this tension that's always there, is what work needs to be done. How do you focus a system, make decisions, and create a long-term plan that will outlive you, because again, sometimes it does, to ensure that you're heading, because again, we're just keeping the seats warm. As a superintendent, we're just keeping the seats warm. And it's also what's been said is bringing people up that are going to be sustaining your seat, but just making sure that there's an intentional plan that's incredibly transparent, that's put together, the vision from the board, the stakeholder input. That way it can outlive you, because if it's a community sponsored, in terms of what the initiatives that they want to see in your school system, it's already there. You can call it a strategic plan, an action plan, whatever you want to call it. There's strategies in place that are in place that are going to make the system better.
So I think the question was about diverse perspectives from cabinet members. And so if we're going to ask our principals to coach and develop their people a certain way that require kids to then have skill sets to be like that graduate profile, we ourselves in cabinet, like this past year, we had our own third-party consultant that worked with us on how to become a more effective team. Like they worked with us, they worked with our departments, they did surveys of what our people wanted. You know, not everybody in central office wants to be a superintendent. Some want to be assistant superintendent for curriculum, some want to go into maintenance. So, you know, we first surveyed their needs. And so we went through training ourselves, which was really eye-opening, because we all of us sat in the seat, you know, and first reaction was, there's nobody that's never been a superintendent that's going to tell me, you know, how to get better in my job. And a year afterwards, I was like, okay, you taught me how to get better. You know, and it was just, you know, we started that with us first, so that when we incorporated organizational health inventories for all of our campuses, which require us to coach and develop our principals could now see, you know, what their own people were thinking about some of the things that they were doing, you know, and the assistant principals are a part of that. So I think that opens up this transparency amongst teachers that say, look, cabinet principals, they're being grown and developed, and they're asking us to grow and develop our kids. They're modeling it. I think that creates trust in the system. And, you know, we share that with our board. You know, our board witnessed our own work with, you know, we call them human architects, right? Training for cabinet members. And then the board members got a confidential report of all the schools' organizational health inventories, right? Because we use them as part of the evaluation process here in Texas. And so that protects the principal, you know, from this information getting out in public. But it also allows the board members, I mean, honestly, that's where teachers go to, right? If they don't like something, they go straight to a board member if it's a small community. And so if the board members can see how we're growing and developing our principals, can see the actual data, you know, that's from the teachers and not a conversation in a grocery store with the board member, that's a valuable tool to then have the board member say, you know, when somebody comes to them, no, this is how we as a district are growing and developing our people. We've seen it, we believe in it, and they support it, and they keep that. It's helped kind of change the trajectory of what we're doing academically, because now we're on alignment, and even the board members are speaking the same language we speak in cabinet, which I think only helps the system. It's not perfect, but it's the beginning, right? We'll iterate it again next year, and we'll, you know, we'll move third-party training. If a campus needs help on teaming, then we're going to support them that way too. And they're open to it because they know we've been through it.
That's helpful. So it sounds like the audience is intrigued by the organizational health inventory. And Joe, you mentioned, you know, the start, stop, continue. So I want to kind of modify the question that I was going to pose. And can we dive deeper into how do you get to know the system? So Gustavo and then Serena, I'm going to have you, we're going to go in reverse order on the panel, but, you know, there's organizational health inventories. It sounds like Michael has also used outside consultants. Joe's talked about this start, stop, continue. Joe, I know there's other work that you've done to look at data, so I want to hear that later. But Gustavo and Serena, can you kick us off with this question? What is the type of information and data that you're looking at in those early months to guide you as you think about coaching your leaders, building your leaders, and setting your priorities?
Thank you for the question. I think when I go into systems, and I've done it 5 times, is really take time to really build relationships and get to understand the people, not just in your system, but in your community. So everybody has their entry plans that they do in terms of what they're going to look for and what data sets you're going to look at. And you look at your typical data sets, you know, the academic performance, graduation rates, your typical things. But what I do, I spend a lot of time with people. I spend a lot of time in communication and in community, and be very, very visible in community. So engage with anybody who, in a couple of my districts, I spend a couple of weeks where I just had open session with the new superintendent, and people can make appointments with me to just come in and talk to me about whatever they wanted to talk about. So, and that gets a pretty good understanding of if a system, you know, in one district, there was a lot of people that came in one system, not very many. That tells me a lot right there about the communication, how open the district was. And just spend on time getting to know your board in terms of just what their priorities are. And they do have their agendas that they come in with, and just see how, again, just get to know them as people as well. So again, a lot of relationship building and your typical data sets that you would want to see as a superintendent, and what's worked, what hasn't. And again, just really get to know your people and spend time, but not just your building leadership, but your assistant principals, talk to teachers, talk to your classified, you know, go to transportation, just go talk to as many people as you can. I can't express that enough, is that's critical, because that's going to add value to you later on.
Yeah, I don't know if I could add too much more, except to say that in those moments when you're building relationships, someone mentioned it earlier, but figure out who the decision makers are. And who the leaders are. Oftentimes the decision making, the leaders are not ones that hold that positionally, right? And so who is it within the system, within the community, what parent, what staff member, what role that has voice, and that a lot of people listen to, and that has a lot of allies behind them. And those kinds of people tend to have institutional relationships and memories, and they also know where bodies were buried, and they know what to tell you to do and what to tell you not to do. And so, again, communication is currency. I can't say enough about the time that you need to spend when you are coming to know a system. And as Gustavo said, yeah, you got all of those data sets, and people will be giving them to you. You'll be looking at data until your eyes pop out of your head. But the reality of the situation is that it's up to you as a leader to make the points of intersection between the qualitative and the quantitative data that you're seeing, and then also your own vibe, your own experience. Like, people can tell you whatever, but you know when you step into a system as a leader, whether or not that the vision is being actualized, whether or not the mission is being actualized, whether or not people's narrative is matching the lived experiences of staff and students in that community each and every day. That will begin to shape and form, you know, your own vision, your own narrative. And then there are also some really tangible, important things to pay attention to, like a strategic plan. Does one exist? If one doesn't exist, that tells you a lot about the community that you're stepping into. And so it's just some very basic things that you're looking for that will begin to tell you some very complex things about the community that you're stepping into.
Thank you so much. So I can't believe we're already near the end of our time together, because our audience just kept asking really great questions. And I do want to acknowledge that there were some questions that were posed we didn't get to, but I promise that we'll send some follow-up emails, and I will ask our panelists if they will divide up some of these questions and be willing to connect with folks who joined today. And I know that they're all here to donate their time and provide mentorship. So you will get follow-up on some of those questions. I do want to do a quick round the room before I close us out on one final go forward, whether it's a call to action for these new leaders or a parting piece of advice based on what we discussed this morning from each of you. So can I start, Serena, since you just were talking, can we start with you, and then Gustavo, sure. Michael, and Joe?
Yeah. One thing I didn't say in my introduction is that I also work for one of the largest search firms for superintendents. So I'm knee deep in this work all the time. So there seems to be a couple of people on the call that are also aspiring, Layla. And so what I would say to you that if you're aspiring, and this might sound like it's simple, but it's so true, is make sure you match the community that you're interested in going to. And then even in the preparation stage, don't just apply for every superintendency because you're not a good match for every superintendency. And if I see one more cover letter to one district that has the name of another district, okay, no, that's beside the point. Anyway, just know, be prepared for the process. And because the community is looking for a genuine connection. So if you've got like 5 or 6 searches that you're doing, that you're in right now, that it doesn't show the authenticity of you really being ready to move into a particular district. The second thing that I would leave you with is that this is probably one of the hardest times for superintendents right now. I can't say in my 31 years in the profession, in my 20 plus years in leadership, and in my over almost a decade working either in the superintendency or with superintendents, that I've ever known a time where people are just struggling day in and day out to do this very important work. So my last thing I would leave you with is do your own personal work first, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, to make sure that you are grounded and centered in yourself before you take on leading a community. If there are some things that you need to work on personally, work on those things personally, and you'll be even better when you sit in the seat.
And I'll just echo the take care of yourself. I think Joe said it earlier as well. Make sure you take care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So make sure you take care of yourself physically and mentally, but also just be resilient. One thing I'll offer, be resilient as a young leader. There's going to be, this job will be hard. It is the best job I've ever had. It is literally the best job I've ever had. I get to help kids each and every day. It is a passion job. It is my life work. This is my work. And I am proud to be the superintendent in Beaverton, but be resilient and seek mentors to help you. Do not be afraid to make a call as a superintendent and seek mentors. Go out and call other people. Call us. We will call you back. We will call you back. We're here. It is a small circle as a superintendent group. It is a small circle. So make sure you use those lifelines for support. Thank you.
Michael, before you share, Gustavo, so to double down on that, one of our attendees asked for email addresses from you all. So if you don't mind sharing your contact information in the chat for our attendees, it sounds like some folks would appreciate it. Okay, Michael, sorry.
Sorry, we're not good at multitasking. I would say everything that's been said, know the community. I could not apply in certain parts of Texas. It's just their history. I would say research, the search firms. There are some more reputable search firms than others, and that leads you not to apply for every single position. Say scrub your social media, and understand that, I'm pretty political here. If you look at my social media, I'm pretty aggressive with how I message the governor and the TEA commissioner, but I know full well that if I go to certain areas of the country, I would not be able to do that. And that's just a part of it. I have a board who is very politically active and supports that. If I had a very conservative board, I would have to be more careful in how I message, because I am representing them, and you have to understand that. And then I would say, don't lose sight of who you are. Don't change your personality to fit a job. Your integrity, what you say to one and how you treat others, will come back on you if you're caught doing something. And understand it's a lonely job. That's why you got to be healthy. You got to have good relationships. You got to have a good mentorship, a good peer mentorship group, because it's the loneliest chair. I think people mentioned the listening tour. I think my mom said it best. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use your ears twice as much as your mouth, and you won't get in trouble more, right? You have to understand that going in, and then just understand you need to be respected and not liked. And there is a difference, because a respected person can carry uncomfortable conversations with people who are not a good fit for the organization, do it in a professional manner, and still, protect everybody's professionalism in doing so. So please reach out to us. I know to me if you have any questions, and we're here to help. It's like a roller coaster ride.
And I'll echo what Michael said about listening. I think as a first-year superintendent for my third time, ask the right questions. You've got to ask the right questions of the right people, and use organizations to help ask those questions. You know, Serena said communication is currency. We've had a full-blown communications audit from the National School PR Association. We've worked with Education Elements and some of their parent companies, and they're helping us focus. So when you have all of this information, you have all these priorities from all your constituents, use reputable groups to help you focus. We have 17 schools and a million different plans, and no one knows what our priorities are. You've got to be able to drill those down and be able to communicate in a meaningful way. And outside of your first or maybe your second year as a superintendent, that district becomes yours. Those decisions you now own. So use that time wisely to ask the right questions and to share the information so the community understands what they want out of their district, and your job is to get them there with the board and with your executive team. So make sure you're communicating, but you're communicating the right information.
Well, my final thought here is I want to rename this session to invest in yourself, your community, and your leaders, because I think those are the themes that stand out to me from the discussion this morning. So I would encourage our audience to take the advice that you heard this morning. Make sure you're investing in yourself first, invest in the community that you're entering, invest in those leaders who are going to support you and your staff and your students, right? So thank you again to ALAS. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our audience for being so engaged and asking such thoughtful questions. We wish you luck wherever you are in your leadership journey. And I look forward to seeing everybody in our next Education Elements webinar.